Man, we got a big crowd tonight. Really appreciate all y'all joining us, and this is awesome, man. It's a fun time of year to be at the lake. May is always good. Things are still kind of behind what they have been, but May bass fishing is really good. There's a lot of different ways to catch them in May. Never fails. But you got bait spawns, right? So you got bass spawn. There's still some bass spawn happening, but you got bait spawns are kind of the primary deal. We've been having shad spawn. That's kind of winding down, but now we've really got a good bluegill spawn starting to happen. And that can be a key deal, man. These bass come off these beds. They're real hungry. So tonight we're going to talk to you about bluegill spawns. And we actually had a few different things to talk about. These guys are going to talk about what they've been doing on the water. I'm going to talk about what I've been doing. Everything's happening. And at any time you have questions, just shout them out or raise your hand, however you want to do it. Doesn't matter. But I got this in this week, so I wanted to share this with y'all. I've never got one of these before because I never remember to turn in the information on the app. But this year, yeah, this year I was super fortunate to catch an 11-pounder off a bed. And I'd just been at the Sharelunker Center doing a video the night before, like the evening before, so I remembered. And I did get scales off of it. We're going to get the genealogy on the fish eventually. That'll take some time, though. But the Sharelunker program, for those that don't know, you don't have to catch a 13-pounder to participate in the Sharelunker program anymore. If you catch a fish over 8 pounds, all you got to do is weigh it on a scale, take a picture of that fish on the scale, and download their app for free, and you can turn it in. And every time you turn a fish in, you get a box with goodies in it. I've never got one. I haven't even opened it yet, so I'm going to find out what's in here at the same time you guys are going to find out, and you guys are going to find out. There's different classes, so if you catch anything like from 8 to 10 pounds is, I don't remember what it's called, but that's a class, and then 10 to 13 is a class, and of course 11-pounder falls in that. I think it's called the Legacy. No, the Legacy is the ones over 13, right? I'm not like an official name kind of guy. Like I'm not like, we don't worry about exact definitions stuff. We fishing guides around here. So let's see what they give you for catching one 11 pounds. I got a hat. David, you need a hat?
I'm good. I got 100 hats.
You got 100 hats? Toyota Sharelunker program hat. So that's cool. Item number 1. I'm not...
Stanley trailer.
It's like a spinnerbait trailer or something. Yeah, spinnerbait and jig trailer. Cool.
Stanley. All expenses paid trip to the Bahamas? Is that what it says?
This is actually a pouch that they send you because Cody was with me the day we did this, and it was a mess. We were like, well, where are we going to put these scales? We just took an old Yamamoto bag that was in the boat, rinsed all the salt out of it, dried it off, and then put the scales in there. So I guess maybe that's why they sent me one of these. Now I've got, this is a pouch for your scales. It has instructions. We got some Yum Dingers. We got some Rivet Frogs. And you get a decal that says 10 plus, Sharelunker 10 plus. So pretty cool. But that helps these guys, okay? The whole purpose of them expanding the Sharelunker program, because I know there was a lot of people when they expanded the Sharelunker program were like, that's not a real Sharelunker. I was one of them, like, that's not a real Sharelunker. A real Sharelunker's over 13, right? Right? That's what a real Sharelunker. But the deal with this program is it helps these biologists do a better job of managing our fisheries throughout the state. The more data they get, the more points of data they can get, the better picture they have of how we're doing in the state in all our different fisheries, right? So if they know you're catching X amount of 8-pounders out of here and X amount of 8-pounders, they know where they need to stock more, where they need to put the Sharelunker offspring, where they need to put the Florida offspring, all that stuff that's way above my pay grade that they know how to do. It just helps them to collect more data. So I encourage all of you, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody of not doing it when I catch one over 8. We're spoiled out here, right? Like an 8-pounder is not that uncommon out here, so you don't really think it's that big of a deal sometimes as much as we probably should. But I encourage all of you guys to really participate in the Toyota Sharelunker program. Download that app and turn in the data, the catch data on those fish when you get them. And it's going to help our already best in the game fisheries department do even better job. So check that out.
Logo in there.
You did netter. You did netter, and you did a heck of a job. I guarantee you. It's good. It's a good thing for you and your family and everybody that you know that you did a good job. Because if you would have screwed up the net job on 11, I'm not real sure where we'd be today. I'm really not sure how that.
Place me and my cousin are right now from Toledo.
Okay. Yeah. I'm really not sure how that would have worked out. Also, Lake Fort Marina does such a great job allowing us to take over their facility here. And they've got something that, you know, they never ask us for anything in return. We come here, we invade them every 2 weeks on Friday nights and take over their whole store pretty much. And they never ask anything of us. And the only time they ever ask anything of us is when they're trying to do something for somebody else. So They've got a raffle, and this benefits this raffle is a charity deal, and it benefits a missionary in, I think it's Honduras.
I think it's what you said last.
Honduras. It's a missionary charity deal, and it's a raffle, and they've got full day guide trip from David Morris, Capitan boots, and you can buy. Oh, and a $2,500 gift certificate from Lake Fork Marina. So some pretty big prizes in here. Tickets are $5 each, or $5 for $20. So if you guys might be interested in $2,500 worth of tackle from here, or a trip with David Morris, who I couldn't recommend enough. He's one of my good friends out here. He's a very, very, very good fishing guide, so that would be well worth it in itself. And apparently some Capitan boots, which I'm not real sure what that is, if I'm being honest. You might know what that is? No? Okay. Capitan boots, but $5 for a ticket, and it's going to a great cause, and it helps Lake Fork Marina do what they do, which is always helping others. So we appreciate Lake Fork Marina. Y'all go support that if you can. We sure would appreciate it. All right, now let's get into Bluegill Spawn. So I just want you guys to come in wherever you feel like on this deal. I'm going to kind of go over the way that I do the Bluegill Spawn. I think it's a little bit unique, and the only reason I think it's a little bit unique is because I don't really see other guys doing it the same way. You know, you fish out here enough, you kind of start seeing how guys are fishing. You know, they come in an area, fish around you, you can kind of notice how they're fishing. I call it pond fishing. Essentially what I want to do, and with today's technology, this year it's easier than ever for me. Always before I used this right here to find bluegill beds, right? And that's great. I can find the bluegill bed with these, but by the time I see the bluegill bed, I'm where I want to be fishing. And now I've got to back off, give it time, slow down, let that rest, and then come back through there and fish it the way that I want to fish it, how I'm fixing to explain to you. But now with Humminbird 360, I can see that bluegill bed at 80, 100 feet, however far I want to see it, really. Those bluegill beds show up on Humminbird 360 like a bright light. Super easy to see. So if you have that technology, it's going to help you a lot when it comes to the brim spawn. But what I basically do is I find an area that has a good amount of brim beds, a pocket. I really like to find a pocket. Windier days, you kind of have to change your tactics. We'll talk about that afterwards. But on the calmer days, I just want to find a pocket that has an abundance of brim beds in it. So once I've started to see some brim beds, what I'm going to do is go pond fishing in that pocket. And what I mean by that is I'm going to take a little section of that pocket, or if it's a small pocket, the pocket itself, and I'm going to fish that area around that brim bed. So if this is the brim bed, I'm not fishing here, right? If this little tub, that's not where I'm fishing. I'm fishing that stump right there, and that stump right there, and that laydown right there, and that stump over there. A lot of what I do on this deal is actual vertical standing timber, which is pretty rare. I don't do that very often out here. There's so much of it out here, but I don't specifically target vertical standing timber because there's so much of an abundance out here. But what I feel like happens is those bass, and especially the big bass, will hold next to that vertical standing timber outside of those brim beds and sit there and wait for an opportunity to strike those brim. And so what I like to do is I like to take a Texas rig, just a really simple Texas rig, just a 1/4 ounce Texas rig. I'm using the hog walla. Before this bait was invented, I used to use a brush hog. They're very similar baits. This is kind of a hybrid between a lizard and a brush hog, and they bite it. Since the day I've got this bait in my hands, they bite it. But it's called a hog walla. This is the color I've been using the most, and it is called Watermelon Candy Magic. But anything that's like a watermelon type color with some different color sparkle in it, that's going to work for a brim bite pretty much. You can have watermelon red, green pumpkin burst is another one. Just green with sparkles, what you need. 1/4 ounce Texas rig, and I'm just going outside of those brim beds and pitching to every piece of vertical timber that I see. And you don't have to wait. We're being very methodical in that we're fishing every piece of cover in that little area, but you don't have to soak your bait. Like that bait falls, hop it a couple times. If they ain't bit it, pick it up, pitch to the next one. So as far as your bait going in and out, it's pretty quick. But as far as being in an area, it's going to take you a little while, especially if you're in an area that's got a bunch of timber, to hit every piece of timber around there. Does that make sense? That's how I catch the majority of the fish that I'm catching on a bluegill spawn. That's my favorite way to catch them. It's the easiest way to catch numbers. Now, if you're not tournament fishing, you ain't got to worry about unders. You just want to catch the biggest fish you can and you don't mind getting less bites. What you can do is go to a 3/8 ounce flipping jig in the same type of colors. I use the 6 hybrid jigs. They didn't have any stock downstairs. And all this stuff I just pulled from the shelves downstairs. So you guys can buy any of this you want to tonight right here in store. This is an impact flipping jig, which obviously everybody knows Mark Pack passed away unfortunately earlier this year. But one of his last inventions is this weed guard on this impact jig, which is very unique and it works very, very well. It is the most weedless jig you'll ever fish, no doubt about it. But I'll take a green and brown colored jig, 3/8 ounce, and I'll put green with sparkle. This is green pumpkin burst stroker crawl. I'll put that stroker crawl on that 3/8 ounce jig, and I'll pitch that. So I'll do the exact same thing, but I'll catch a bigger fish on average on a jig than I will a Texas rig creature bait. I'll catch more fish on the Texas rig creature bait in general, but I'll catch bigger fish on the jig. And they'll bite both, you know, so you can do both if you want to throughout the day. You know, they got to put that poor package of baits back on the shelf that you're shoving down your shirt right there, you know. You're stealing from Lake Fork Marina, not me, just so you know.
Did you steal those off the shelf?
Yeah, they're off the shelf.
Oh, you don't.
Yeah.
I thought they were yours.
Yeah, no, All right, last but not least, this is a fun way to do it. It's a little more challenging way to do it. You need a little bit higher skill level to do this. You're going to have some good boat control, and you're going to have some good casting accuracy, and you're going to have to be pretty good with a crankbait in your hands around heavy cover. So it's a little bit tougher, but the best way to catch the biggest fish on this pattern is to get in an area, especially if you can get like a main lake oriented area that has some brim beds around it, and there's wind on it, like when it's windy. So if it's real windy, it's going to make it a lot harder for me to go in there and slow down and pitch all these stumps, right? But when it is wind blown, I'm gonna pick up a shallow diving crankbait. This is a Movement 80X. You could also use a square bill if you wanted to. I really like this bait because of how aggressive the wobble it is. It draws a big fish bite. And make no mistake about it, guys, there are some absolute giant post-spawn females that hang around these brim beds for several weeks when they're done spawning. Right now is the time to do it. It's the best time from now for over the next few weeks. It's gonna be amazing. If you get this pattern dialed in and you start catching them on it, there's not a lot of guys doing this. And you're gonna catch some big fish doing it. This is about the best brim color crankbait for this lake that I've ever seen. And this is called Gillikin, right? Yeah, this is the Gillikin color. It's Ben Milliken designed this color. I mean, he's kind of a goober, but he nailed it on that right there. I mean, this is for this area. If you've ever seen brim in this area, in the winter, they'll change colors a little bit, but right now in the spring, you're looking at a green pumpkin and pumpkin seed colored fish, brown and green. The jig is green and brown, right? The creature baits are green with sparkle. Like they're green, they're predominantly a green color with some brown in them or orangish color to them. And I'll pass this around and you guys can see that color absolutely nails it. But the other reason I really like using this bait is because when the wind is rocking an area, it's hard to control your boat. And when I'm taking a crankbait, and I'm throwing it through and I'm trying to make it contact timber and flooded bushes, like I got to get it in there and make it bounce around, really draw some attention to it. That's how you're going to get these reaction bites from these really big fish. That's why your size goes up even over the jig on the crankbait. The biggest ones you'll catch on this pattern will be in the windy areas with this crankbait. This is the most snag-free crankbait I've ever fished. It dives really shallow so it doesn't get caught up in the bottom too bad, but when it hits something hard, it wobbles so hard that when it hits that tree, it bounces well away from it. And it really causes big reaction bites, and it comes through the cover better. So when I'm fighting boat control and casting behind me and doing this and that, you know, I'm having to kind of contort my body to fish the bait correctly, it's hard to make sure that you're reeling it through there correctly. So it helps have a bait that works better when you're doing it. So the Movement 80X, the most snag-free crankbait I've ever fished. That's why I picked that one, fishing wind-blown areas with bluegill beds on them. Pass it around for me. And as far as that wind-blown deal, I will get a little more main lake oriented. When I'm slowing down with the flipping deal, I'm gonna be in pockets where I'm targeting brim beds. But if you go down like, I mean, just not even necessarily main lake, but like in the main part of a creek arm, right? So let's take like a Bell Branch per se. Bell Branch has 4 or 5 little kickoff pockets in them, right? So when it's calm, I'm gonna get in those pockets and look for brim beds. But when that wind's blowing hard out of the southwest into that north bank of Bell Branch, what did I say, is it Bell? Yeah, Bell.
Bell.
I'm thinking, right? That's the one with the big hump out in front of it, right?
Bell, yes.
Okay. I get confused on my name sometimes. But anyway, I'll actually fish down the main creek bank. Like, you know what I'm saying? The little pockets that kick off to the north. May fish some in there, but I'm really going to fish that main bank part as long as I'm seeing some of those brim beds on the outside on my Humminbird 360. And usually with brim, they kind of will. They'll spawn a little bit of everywhere. I mean, even these banks, you know, outside of Little Caney, on the other side across from Oak Ridge and Minnebuck's got all those pockets in there, you'll find brim beds out on the main lake bank of that as well. I mean, they'll get out there. So anytime I have those type of areas, the wind's blowing into them, I really love to get in that wind and pick that crankbait up because your bite, you can catch some big fish. I'm telling you guys, you catch some really big fish doing that. It's something that I've done every year for several years now, and I feel like a lot of times I'm the only one doing it because I never see anybody else in the areas I'm targeting these fish, fishing the way that I'm fishing, and it's been a really consistent pattern. It's hard on this lake to find a pattern that holds up year after year because this lake gets so much pressure, but this is one that's held up for me. So that's how I'm attacking the brim spawn. The Humminbird 360 certainly makes my life easier. Is there any questions? No? David?
For those of us
How are you doing, brother?
who do not have the technology this goober's got,
I got it all now.
he's got the technology on his boat.
Hey, I just went and got a new mount for my active target. Now I got my active target mounted where it doesn't turn with my trolling motor shaft, so I got that going too.
For the rest of us in the room who have to go old school, there's a big difference in the way that he has to perceive the game versus what I have to perceive the game.
No doubt.
Because I don't have that technology on hand at this moment. So I've always been taught that the brim or the massive spawn is usually between 79, 83, 84 degrees when the water warms up. And then those brim will move up shallow and they will create beds in which on my side scan, I have seen brim beds already. But in a lot of shallow places where the water's been cooler, the water is too muddy to be able to see those brim beds. All right, so you have to go by temperature. I was throwing a frog 10 days ago in an area where the water was 81 degrees. Okay, and so with 81 degrees, I was like, I'm going to be tackling anything that's frog oriented. And I searched high and low for every place on this lake that I could find a certain structure on this lake in order to get the best frog bites. And we did catch a lot of 4s, 5s, and 6s on a frog. Nothing over that. I do hear of some 8s and 9s being caught, but we didn't get a hold of those. But anyway, we were getting good bites on that. So based off that water temp, when this rain started, that temp dropped back to 68, 69, 70, 71 in those areas. And all of a sudden, the bigger fish weren't biting quite as good, but we were still catching smaller fish on the frogs, all right, going down the same areas. And so I started noticing a parallel. Does that mean that when the water temp dropped, did the brim move away, move out? Are now the water temps warm back up 75? Are they moving back in? So that's the only logic that I have to work with, is how the temperature affects those fish being shallow. Now, take the shallow, you just don't go anywhere shallow and throw a frog and throw a swim jig in those same areas. You find the areas right now when the lake came up to 9, 10 inches over pool, you go around the lake and you'll find areas behind the alligator grass, right? And you go to find all those places like that, and you'll find that a lot of times I've had it to where those blow-ups were slightly behind the back of the alligator weed, right? And then up to the bank where there was another type of vegetation right on the bank. Well, then the water dropped to 403.07, and now we pull in there one day and all of a sudden we catch 5 and a 6 on the outside edge of the alligator weed. We didn't get any bites in the back. And so, because that water had dropped down. 2 days later, now the water's up 9 inches back behind it again. So it's just a move here, move there type of thing. Well, the places we're fishing right now, we've got the alligator weed, we've got some lily pads out in front of it, and the water's going up and down, and those fish are hanging in those areas. So I'm watching the temps also. And a lot of times when the temps are down a little bit, I'll throw a smaller frog up there. And then when the temps are higher, I'll throw a bigger frog. And that's how we've been catching a lot of the fish we've been catching on a lot of these guide trips here recently. And so the trick to it is get in, and like say for example, you go down a bank and you'll see a vegetation mat there. All right, let's say there's no water, the mat grows all the way up to the bank. Usually I don't get bit on that. I'm looking for a place that there's scattered stuff. It's not exactly real thick and it's loose. Find the places that are loose with that, whatever that
more
weed's
likely
called.
for a fish to be able to move around.
It's easier for them, two things. It's more easier for them to move around. The second thing is, can they see it better? Third thing is, I got a better chance to get him out of that once he blows up on that frog. And the big key to it, and a lot of people can't do it, is you've got to give it a full 2 seconds before you lean on it. I mean, as soon as he blows up on it, you can't react. You got to stay still and just bide your time for just a second. And then lean on it and then give him all you got, because what those things do is that because of that stuff is so viney, They're going to run a 5-6 pounder, runs down into that vine stuff, and I'm telling you, with 65-pound braid, we're pulling up some vine like you can't even imagine. And we've lost a few, granted, but
you're going to lose some frogs.
Is that it's a task, but the trick is finding the places where the grass is the loosest in certain areas, whether it be on a point, whether it be in a pocket, or whatever the case. The places that it's solid to the bank, just blowing by that until you find some loose grass. And that's what I've been striking the biggest riches on.
Is there a certain way that you're working that frog?
Well, I've been using a popping frog, a black one. And one day I had a guy in the boat, and he totally ran over me on a black popping frog. And I was using a white, was using a live target, white one. And I love the way that one, how it works. It wasn't a popping frog, and he just totally roasted me that day. Now, was it the fact that he had a popping frog? I don't know. And so I went and acquired a black 6 cents Vega. And
by the way, they also make that Gillikin color that's on that crankbait. They make that in a frog.
And
too.
I've got another one, a frog like that. Well, I threw that lighter color bellied frog that day. I did not get a bite on it. The black frog was the dominant.
Yeah, you know, I find that when the shad spawn fades and the bluegill spawn comes into play, that the frog color changes.
Yeah, exactly.
You go from throwing, earlier in the year you throw white, frogs seem to do better. But then when that bluegill spawn comes in, the darker colored frogs tend to
And
shine.
here's my logic to this. I don't know what he's going to say. My logic to this is that this water being cold, I truly don't think a lot of those brim in those areas have come up yet to spawn. And the reason
we're at the front edge of it.
And the reason why I say that is I have seen zero explosions in the grass, in this vegetation. Whenever those bass are after those brim up there in that, you're going to see them going after them. And there's a lot of times that I've seen them come completely out of the water after a brim. And so you'll know when it's full throttle. So we bide our time right here, get as many bites as we can. I still think the best is yet to come.
It's interesting because we're fishing the same pattern, the bluegill spawn, brim spawn. But from what you're saying, you're fishing in totally different types of areas than I am. I'm fishing in areas that are more water clarity.
You're better water clarity. I'm fishing the stuff that's muddy.
Yeah, and you're fishing the flooded vegetation. And where I'm fishing, there's really not flooded vegetation, but there's flooded, button bushes and standing timber, and it's more open water where these bluegills that I'm targeting are spawning, and you can actually see the beds.
Right.
If you get close enough to them, whereas you're actually targeting grass-related fish, which is kind of different. Yeah. Same pattern, but just completely. And what's funny is, this is what we do as fishermen is, I think a lot of people overthink baits. What you need to do when you're picking what technique or what baits to throw is what bait can you fish efficiently in that cover. Mm-hmm. And David's fishing a lot of grass, so he's throwing a frog and probably a swim jig some.
Swim jig. We caught a lot on a swim jig, throwing up in the same because of that scattered stuff. It's easy to throw a swim jig through there. And then there's 2 or 3 ways the way I do the swim jig in order to make it clean through there better and where it doesn't hang up. I grew up on Sam Rayburn, Toledo Bend back in the day when there was tons of grass there, so I'm a vegetation junkie. And so I would almost opt to go to the vegetation before I would do anything else. That's just my nature. Is it wrong? No. Is what he does wrong? No. It's all the multitude of patterns on this lake that you can play to and be successful at. The reason why you're sitting here is how do I fine-tune those that they can benefit me? Mm-hmm. And when you sharpen those skills based off the fine little bitty nuances of changes that you make in order to adapt to it, then you start catching more fish.
Well, let me ask you, have you punked any of that grass?
Ooh, that's what I was going to say too. Hey, when they're moving from the back to the front side of it, you get that big stick out?
No, I have not done that, but I got schooled by a kayaker last year on the same situation.
Yeah.
I was in this pocket.
I've heard this story. It's a good one.
Here comes this guy around this corner on a kayak, and he's got this thing on plane. And I'm like, dude, he says, man, I got to get in there. He's fishing some national tournament or whatever, and I backed out, and I said, well, you're fishing a tournament. I'm not. I'll be your spectator boat. So I backed out, put the poles down. He gets in there, and I'm thinking he's going to, just fish the edge of that alligator grass. And so next thing I know, he's standing up in that thing, punching a 1-ounce jig in it in 18 inches of water. Yep. And I've kicked up on the old deal like this with my feet propped up like that. I'm going like, yeah, let's see what this guy does. Next thing I know, he goes, 5-pounder. And I'm like, no way.
Yeah, so the punching deal is another one that, I didn't, I was specifically talking about what I've been doing right now. And But the punching deal is something that every May and June, it gets, and it doesn't get as overlooked as it used to. There's more people that have done it the last few years. But man, about 4 or 5 years ago, it was like, we had a bunch of water hyacinth in the lake. And water hyacinth's really easy to punch because it's extremely hollow underneath. So I could go along and kind of anywhere I found some water hyacinth with a little bit of water under it, man, you could catch them in May and June doing that. It was like nobody's. Now a few more people do it, so it's got a little bit more challenge. But it's still, here's the thing about punching that makes it so effective. It is as pure of a reaction bite as you'll ever get. Because when that bait breaks through that mat, and it's a 1.5 ounce weight, it is zipping right in front of their face. Like that's when you're getting your bites punching, is that bait's going, well, so that fish is literally just going and just snapping at it because it's flying, it's something that irritating him going by his face. And those big Florida strain bass that this lake is full of, if you've ever been to Florida or ever watched Florida fishing or anything like that, those big female Florida bass love to get under the heaviest, densest cover they can and just hunker down underneath there and eat whatever comes by them. And that's why punching is always so prevalent in Florida, and it works here too. In years where we have the vegetation set up right, the flooded vegetation, punching is a dynamite technique on this lake. And it is related to the bluegill because those bluegill are spawning either on the outside edge or the inside edge of that grass in the areas that have it. Like David's targeting them, doing that. And then when that water starts fluctuating, depending on where those fish are, sometimes they're going to be under that mat.
Well, too, in that area that I'm fishing, a lot of the areas that I'm fishing right now has that thickness of the front leading edge of it that could be punched. I've just never punched it. Yeah. And I mean, it's there to do probably. Yeah. And it's there. It goes some places, it goes back 10, 15, 20 feet. And yeah, you could punch something. It's got to be heavy in there though. You know, but the deal is that day when I studied that, I'm looking and that water was not dirty, but it wasn't clear either. So it was an in-between color. And I could see that being an advantage, you know, and he was fishing something fairly dark going down through there. And I'm thinking, you know, so it wasn't mud and it wasn't clear. I could see pretty gin clear might not work as good, but I've never given it the time to spend, you know, to go in and just tackle that one day to do it.
What you're punching, it may be slower, but it's going to pay off.
It's just, punching is like, it just never fails. To me, it's such a reaction-driven bite. There's not very many days, if you've got good mats, and this time of year with the water temps being what they are, like you say, you don't need but a foot or two of water underneath them to hold fish. Well, you know, later in the summer, you need 3, 4, 5 foot of water under them to hold fish. But right now, you only need a foot or two, and they'll have fish under them. And there's almost always some big bass underneath a heavy vegetation mat. And it's such a reaction bite that if you just make enough, thousands and thousands of punches and get through that mat enough times, you're going to get something to react to it. You're not really going to go punching all day in zero.
Well, he says
that's just not going to happen.
The key thing too is the time frame. You know, I think it was, if memory serves me on that, when's that big kayak national championship? Late March, early April?
April, yeah.
Something like that. And, you know, I mean, naturally the water's a little bit colder, and I could see very well where those fish are going to be up there wanting to spawn, you know, so these could have all been pre-spawners. Can you do it now? I want to report on that on my desk by tomorrow at noon.
Yeah, I need to get, I mean, well, I've just, you know, I've had a little bit of limited time on the water. I was gone to Ray Roberts last weekend, at the end of last week, and then I've been tied up with a couple of knuckleheads the last couple of days, so I have had more limited time than normal for me. But, you know, the time that I've been out here, I've been on this pattern that I was talking about earlier, and it worked. It's been pretty good for me. So you know how that goes. You get something going, you just kind of ride her till she bucks you. You know what I mean?
Well, and a few more things to add to the brim spawn. How many of y'all have ever seen a brim or a perch swimming up shallow? What color is the tail?
Chartreuse.
Chartreuse. Yeah. So don't be afraid to dip your tails or whatever in that chartreuse, because it'll just give it that much more of a of a pattern form. I mean, you can throw a weightless fluke back behind the grass mats like he's talking about, or even in front and let it slowly sink and they'll explode on it, or even a damn wacky worm.
That's a beautiful thing about May, isn't it, y'all? Like, it's just you can catch them so many ways in May. It's not always easy. We've had a lot of curveballs thrown our way with changing water levels and colors and temperatures and a lot of fluctuating conditions. Nothing's been stable and consistent. And if you've watched enough of what I've done, you've heard me say this before. You can give me dog day hot. You can give me freezing cold. Maybe not quite as extreme as we got this year. But like, I don't want most of the lake to be iced over, which was weird. But I mean, you can give me really difficult cold temperatures or really difficult hot temperatures or anywhere in between. But if you'll give me stability in any of those conditions, we'll get it figured out. But when it keeps changing, it becomes a challenge to stay dialed into any one thing.
Well, and especially when the lake floods, I mean, it gives them so much more space to get.
Spreads them out. And then I hear they immediately open the gate, so it never even settles at a high level. It just rises and then falls. It never even stays high. It just gets high, and by the time it crests, it starts falling right back down. And so it's a challenging situation with those changing conditions. I'm just glad that it's happening in May when we can still go out and scrap together some good bites, because if this was happening at a different time of year where the bite overall is more difficult and you had this many changes, it'd be like, whew. Like you get this much stuff happening in the fall, you forget about it, Jack. Forget about it. It's a good time of year to be here. And you know what's funny is we're sitting up here talking about this brim spawn, and we could probably bring, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 other guides up here, and they'd probably be telling you about how they're doing everything offshore out in the middle of the pond somewhere, you know, because that's starting to happen too. Hey, that is starting to happen too, by the way. The offshore bite's starting to come into play.